Good afternoon, but if I could return to some of the points that I made. I opened with this observation about the Deobandi schools in Pakistan. Now, there are 600 of these specifically that I'm concerned with, that over the years we have tried to convince the government to shut them down. They're funded primarily by the Gulf states, by individuals, by families in the Gulf states who make these charitable contributions, as they're called. But the problem is that the graduates out of these schools basically have a foundation in radical ideology. So we have the National Action Plan that has been set up by the government. I asked the Congressional Research Service about that particular plan, and they say nearly 1 year later, there remains limited evidence that the government's National Action Plan has brought major policy changes. So I wanted to ask you about that, ask you, Ambassador, about your dialogue with the government about shutting these down so that we shut down the foundation from which this radicalization is occurring. Many of those young people that come out of that experience will go on to become clerics either in Pakistan or elsewhere, and they will continue to expand on this radical jihadist ideology that is advanced in that comes out of the Gulf states and is now being taught.
Well, Mr. Chairman, let me say that we share your concern about the madrasas. We think it's a serious issue. We thought it was significant that it was for the first time addressed as an issue nationally in the National Action Plan that was put out last year. Our understanding is that the government is in the process of putting together a greater regulatory framework for the madrasas. It is presently mapping geotag.
But this isn't rocket science. We're not talking about all madrasas. We're talking about the Deobandi schools. As the Dawn editorial, the newspaper Dawn, said, branding all madrasas as incubators of hate and violence is wrong, but there is little doubt that there still exist across Pakistan religious centers that continue to spew hate, and unless that infrastructure of hate is shut down, Pakistan will never win its struggle for internal peace. That's the issue. We have the list of the 600 schools. I've made 3 trips, as I've indicated, to try to convince the government to shut those down. We've had little success in convincing families in the Gulf states not to send their money there, or convincing those governments in the Gulf states not to fund this. It's a phenomenon that, frankly, it's so frustrating, because what we see is the failure of the government time and time again to address issues that are in that government's own best interest. And this, to me, given the knowledge about what goes on in those 600 schools, is the most obvious and vexing problem that is right in front of us. What do people in the government say about that issue?
Well, I have had some discussions about this, Mr. Chairman, and I agree that there is a huge challenge with the madrasas. The reason, in a way, that they exist and have become popular in Pakistan, if that's the word, is because they do provide a free education. And this has to do with the fact
we're talking past each other. I'm not talking about all the madrasas that provide a free education. I'm talking about the 600 that you and I know are in this particular line of ideological radicalization. And on that issue, clearly, given the amount of money that is spent towards education in the budget, which is about 2.4% that actually goes towards education, I understand. I mean, this is one of the debates here in terms of F-16s and other military hardware is, wouldn't Pakistan be better served addressing this issue of shutting down these 600 schools, and if they do it, funding public education there for individuals, for families, as an alternative for their sons to go to those schools in this case, instead of the lads going to schools where you and I suspect the final outcome is going to be like a lot of others that were radicalized in those Deobandi schools.
I would agree with that analysis, Mr. Chairman. We think that what has to be done is there has to be a further reform of the public education system. The public education system in Pakistan, and it has to be a viable alternative for parents who otherwise have no choice but to send their children to schools that are free, and indeed where not only are they free, but food is provided. So there's a real draw factor in all of this. We also think that it's important that the government of Pakistan, and we're working with in this area, in the countering violent extremism area, to try to reform the curriculum so that at least in the religiously oriented schools there are marketable skills or standardized curricula, and there are attempts to address a more modern perspective.